Hey, welcome back to the garage, everyone. All right, we're going to switch gears over to Cadillac. The old Rochester Quadrajet from 71 here is, I think maybe we might have a little bit of a leak out of the casting well plugs out of the bottom of the carburetor. The old car runs really well going down the road, but at idle it still gets a little jittery here now and again, and the idle just isn't as smooth as it ought to be. I've already tuned the car. It's tuned well. The ignition is tuned well. The dwell, the advance, all that stuff. But this carburetor is an unknown for me because I've never had it off this car, and as you can tell, it's kind of nasty, right? So you can tell the gaskets are leaking some gasoline there, and it's time for this thing to get a little refresh. So I've got a little kit here in the shop by Walker. A new needle seat, a few rings here and there, and some gaskets and whatnot. But the main ticket item that we're going to be taking care of on this one is we're going to pull this guy off here, take it apart, get it cleaned up, get new gaskets in it, new needle in seat, and we're going to get some water weld, JB Weld water weld. That's what we're going to use to seal up the casting plugs on the bottom of the carburetor. This is not going to be a Quadrajet rebuild video. It's just going to be sort of a just to highlight the restoration efforts and ongoing maintenance of this old Cadillac. While we've got the carburetor off, we're going to be taking a look at the intake manifold. It's really nasty. I'd love to get some Cadillac blue paint back on it because it's come off over the years. I've got half a mind to go ahead and pull that manifold and take a look down inside my my intake and exhaust ports just to see if we've got any carbon buildup going on down there. I've already started taking things apart here. I've already got this bracket loose. That's the accelerator kick down switch there you're looking at, and I've got the coil disconnected, and it's kind of grungy too. Probably take it off and paint it too. It works fine, but it'd look pretty nice if it had a nice glossy black paint job on it. Another thing we've got to correct on this car is the air conditioning. So the air conditioning works, but it's so-so. This thing has sprung a leak and it's spewed some. Look at that. You see that right there? Yeah, it's leaked out its oil. So this compressor needs to be resealed and rebuilt. So that's one item we're going to take care of. But in order to get the intake manifold off, we got to get the compressor unbolted anyway. So, and if we're going to do that, we might as well get the compressor rebuilt. So, on the air conditioning front, we're going to take this compressor off, get it rebuilt or replaced. I'd prefer a rebuild, to be honest with you, just to keep everything original. And we're also going to do a full conversion over to R134 gas. We're also going to take this valve off right here and probably have it rebuilt as well, and get these air conditioning lines replaced with a modern equivalent that can hold R134 gas. All right, enough chatter. Let's go ahead and get this carburetor off the car and start the disassembly process. All right, let's go ahead and get our fuel line clamped off. And no, that little piece of rubber line is not stock, clearly. Somebody else did that before I bought the car. I'm not sure why they were in there messing around with that hard line, but it's messed up, so. It is what it is. Let's just get it off of here. Well, there's no gasoline in there. So what does that tell you? Is the one-way valve in our fuel pump leaking down and letting gasoline draw back towards the tank? I'm not sure. One of the problems with this car is the, if you don't crank it for a few days, you get in here and you just have to crank, and finally it'll fire up. The casting plugs are leaking, or maybe the fuel pump valve is leaking down. I don't know. We're gonna do some troubleshooting along the way here in this video series, and we'll get it figured out. That one goes to the vacuum modulator on the transmission. And this one goes to the power brakes. All right, so if you're not familiar with the different kinds of chokes on a Quadrajet attached to the side of the carburetor, I know of three. You got divorced hot air choke, you've got an on carburetor hot air choke, and you've got an electric choke, which is on the carburetor. This carb has got what they call a divorced choke. The thermal spring that is part of the choke is actually down inside the intake manifold. It's down inside this compartment right here instead of being attached to the side of the carburetor. The hot air choke is more in tune with what is really going on with the engine. On other carbs, the hot air choke will be in a little pod right here on the side of the carb. And then of course the electric choke is also on the side of the carb, but you know, it's electric, so it's basically electric choke is kind of like a timer, really. We've got our divorce choke disconnected there, and I think that just leaves 4 bolts to get the carburetor off the car. All right, I think I found something interesting here. So let's take a look at what we have. All right, what do we got right here? What is that, folks? What is that? That is gasoline. Sure enough, looks like we got leaky well plugs in the bottom of our Rochester. Boy, that looks pretty nasty. We got to get that cleaned up. Let's take a look at the carburetor now. All right, I got this thing flipped over, taking a look at the bottom here, and you can tell that our gasket is pretty wet. Clearly this thing has been leaking from the bottom of the carburetor. And let's see if we have any evidence of people trying to seal up these well plugs in the past. I don't see any kind of epoxy right there. And we got some wetness right here on this. Got a lot of wetness on that screw right there and right there. So this, you know, pretty clear this carburetor's been leaking out of the bottom. And let's see what else we have. Got some nasty carbon buildup there on your secondary throttle shaft right there. Anyway, let's see. There's your divorced choke. There's the thermally activated spring right there. All right, enough of that. Let's get this thing torn down, shall we? All right, let's see if we can't start tearing this thing down. The more I look at this carburetor, the worse it gets. So that disconnects the choke plate. Accelerator pump lever. That is the vacuum operated secondary lockout. I think we're ready to finally get the top off this carburetor. There's your choke flap arm. God, this thing is nasty. I should have taken the secondary jet things out. Hell, I can't remember what they're called. It's been about 10 years since I've been in one of these carburetors. I should have did this first before I removed the top. And that's for your secondaries right there. We'll put that screw back there so we don't lose it. Well, that's what the underside of the top plate looks like. Long overdue for maintenance. Accelerator pump. I dropped the needle down in there in the bowl, so. And there's our little needle for the carburetor bowl cutoff. That'll get replaced. Okay, so there we go. There's the bottom of the bowl in our old Quadrajet off our 71. And let's see. What about this crud down in here? Is that... Yeah, see all that? Look at all that mess. Look at that. Look how nasty that is. What a shame. Yeah, this this is definitely an issue. So it was way overdue for some maintenance on this carburetor. But we're gonna make it all better. Got to keep all your parts together. Otherwise, you'll forget where they go. It's not like I do a carburetor every 5 minutes. It's more like every 10 years, you know. Yeah, you can see all that carbon build up on these throttle plate shafts here. Man, this thing's going to be it's going to need to soak a good long while in some Chem Tool carburetor cleaner. All right, so we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of our real task here. You can see there's gasoline and varnish, and it's just a mess. This thing is a basket case. Our task is twofold: rebuild it because, well, it just needs it. And the carbs from this era were really bad about these casting plugs leaking. I'm not too sure about these over here. I don't know that they're leaking. I don't see any evidence. They look clean. I see some metal flaking off of that. That's pretty weird. All right, but over here in this area, it is just horrific. It's just nasty. These two guys here are clearly leaking. I don't think it's a gasket failure, because there was fuel in the cavity down inside the intake manifold. So, you know, if gas is leaking out of the bottom of the carburetor, it's leaking out of the bowl, right? So it's got to be leaking out of these guys right here. So I think once we get this done and back on the car, I think our old Cadillac will be running a lot better. So, all right, I'm going to continue on here. I'm going to get this gasket off next, and let's see. Probably looking at getting these big parts in some carburetor cleaner and let them soak for a while. All right, everyone, I'm calling this a video. We got these few parts right over here in this area. I already ran them through the Berryman's Chem Tool carburetor dip and got those cleaned up a little bit. What else did we do? I got sanded the rust off this divorced choke. I'll probably put a coat of paint on that and make that look a little nicer. This this vacuum pod on the secondary lockout looks pretty doggone new. I think somebody replaced this at some point. The carburetor itself, the big pieces are really gummed up. They're a mess. So we got serious carbon buildup on the throttle shaft right there. And as you will see, where was it? Okay, yeah. We have these casting plugs here. We will use epoxy to seal up these plugs to eliminate the gasoline leak from the bottom of the carburetor. And the epoxy that we're going to use is made by JB Weld, but it's called Water Weld, spelled just like it sounds. And it's supposed to be impervious to water, gasoline, diesel, and all those things. So I would not recommend using regular JB Weld. We're going to use a JB Weld that is designed to be impervious to gasoline. So, all right, so I think that'll turn out pretty well, really. So we're going to get this piece cleaned up and sealed up. Now, let's move on to the bottom plate here. All right, so this is the bottom plate. All right, so these things have a wear item that you may or you may not know about, okay, and that is play in the throttle shaft. So now the hole down in there where the throttle shaft goes through the plate, it gets wallowed out over the years. It gets bigger and bigger, right? The shaft is moving and wallowing around inside its bore, right? Now that causes a vacuum leak, and it makes the carburetor hard to tune, or in some cases impossible if it's really bad. So I have ordered a bushing kit, and that'll be in a few days. I will take these mechanisms off. I'll remove the throttle blades. I'll take the shaft out. I will bore a hole through this plate that is slightly larger, and I will put brass shims all the way through this thing, and then when I reassemble it, it'll be nice and tight. But that will be in an upcoming video, because this is just part one in this particular series on this Cadillac. So the top of the carburetor, I don't really see any issues with it other than the fact that it just needs cleaning and a new gasket. It's a kit that I ordered, and lo and behold, look at that, made in USA. I kind of like that. I like that a lot, actually. All right, so that's got all our gaskets, needles, seat, all that kind of good stuff in there. And so we'll be using that to rebuild the car when we get ready to put everything back together. So in review, we're going to seal up the casting plugs. We're going to install brass bushings in the primary throttle shaft bore, and we will replace a few of these odds and ends here. You know, comically, the only filtration in this carburetor was this screen, believe it or not. So when I put this whole thing back together, it's going to get a proper filter. So, all right, folks, that's it for now. We're going to call this part one in this fuel system maintenance on the 71 Cadillac DeVille. As always, I appreciate you guys stopping by my channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to be notified whenever I release a new video, don't forget to hit that little bell down below. We'll talk to you guys later and look forward to more new cool videos on our 71 Cadillac.